Didn't work. That's supposed to mean the meeting's called to order. That's going to take some getting used to on my part, I have to tell you. Good afternoon, committee members and Minister. Thanks to all of you for being here today. This is our first full meeting after last week's meeting where we adopted some procedural motions and sort of set up the structure of the committee. Minister, first let me say how grateful we all are that you were able to make the time to be available. We had a discussion at our first meeting last week as to how we might set our course, and it was decided unanimously in this group, and with the spirit of cooperation, which I anticipate will continue for the duration of this committee, that if you were available, we would all enjoy you attending. So thank you very much. We know how busy you are, especially on short notice, making the time to be here. We know how important it is for ministers to be involved with parliamentary committees, and this is a great way for us to start. One of the things we're going to do today is after you've left, I understand we've got you for an hour, is we're going to then spend some time charting our course for the future. So your being here today is going to help us a great deal in getting that going. So thank you again. Committee members were not only joined today by Minister Carr, but Mr. Bob Hamilton from the department, who will be here to help us out as well. So thank you, sir, for attending as well. We're going to today talk about the mandate letter and the issues that arise from that. Now, as some, or hopefully all of you are aware, there were some estimates that were tabled in the House late last week, and I understand there was some earlier today. Tomorrow, I stand corrected, at 10 o'clock. The Minister has kindly agreed to come back on a date in March, which I believe we've tentatively set as March 21st, to discuss the issue of the estimates at that time. So rather than deal with that today, we're going to focus on the issues arising out of the mandate letter, particularly since we're limited in the amount of time we have. So again, thank you, Minister, for coming today. So we're going to start with a 10-minute introductory remarks from Minister Carr, and then we're going to follow that with questions using the procedure which we adopted last Wednesday at our meeting. So, Minister, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to all members of the committee. I am really looking forward to this. It's the first time for me. It might be the first time for others of you around the table to participate in a robust discussion centered in this building around this important committee. And I think that more and more of our public policy will be and should be stimulated by robust discussion in a multi-partisan way, and that's what this committee allows. Mr. Chair, you were very happy about that spirit of unanimity. I'm wondering when that word will be used again. Soon, I hope. We all strive for consensus. Unanimity can be elusive, but I'm sure there will be within your own work and within your own debates robust and respectful disagreement. And after all, that's what it's all about. So I congratulate you and I welcome the chance to engage you. J'ai préparé quelques notes pour.
I've prepared some remarks for today, but I would like to begin by thanking all of you for serving on this committee.
Form and shape how Canada develops its natural resources in ways that benefit communities economically and socially. The principles of sustainable development are more important now than they have ever been and will be an essential part of our work together. That's a big responsibility, but also a truly nation-building exercise, because the development of our natural resources puts that at the intersection of so many of Canada's top priorities. For example, climate change and the environment, engagement with Indigenous peoples, innovation, economic growth. The history of Canada's Indigenous peoples and generations of immigrants has been shaped by Canada's vast forests, the exploration, development, and use of minerals and mines, and the abundance of our energy, from hydroelectricity, wind, solar, and nuclear to oil and natural gas. Central to our stewardship of Canada's natural resources has been our profound connection to the land, water, and its wildlife, and the understanding of the quality of life Canada's natural resources have given us and will continue to provide for generations to come, as long as we make good choices, choices based in science and which include the participation of Indigenous people and communities. Natural resource management is a big responsibility. I'm privileged to be tackling this responsibility along with all of you. I'm looking forward to your insights and your input. As you know, these have been challenging times for many of Canada's natural resource industries. The markets have not been kind to commodities, oil, natural gas, minerals, metals. Forestry also faces dramatic changes in the demand for paper and other forest products. Low commodity prices have dictated difficult decisions on capital spending and even more difficult ones on personnel. Behind each resource project cancelled or delayed, there are Canadian families affected and facing uncertain futures. As Minister of Natural Resources, it is seeing the impact of the commodity downturn on Canadian families that concerns and troubles me the most. While this government's fast-tracking of $750 million in infrastructure spending to Alberta does not make up for the job losses in the private sector, it is a start and a signal that while Canada's federal government cannot change oil prices, we do care and will take all reasonable measures to help. Commodity cycles are real. They have highs that drive wealth and prosperity, and they have lows that reduce the flow of investment capital, impacting jobs and government revenues. While we are in this low cycle, I believe there are things we must do now and over the longer term to realize a brighter future. A future built on innovation and adapting to changing times by finding greener ways to extract and develop our natural resources and get them to market. A future built on investing in clean technology and green infrastructure, making greater use of renewable sources of energy, and ensuring that the economic and environmental benefits of energy efficiency are fully realized. So, where do we begin today? My mandate letter from the Prime Minister is a good starting point, and its unprecedented release to the public says a lot about the open and transparent approach we are taking. Any Canadian who is watching this or cares to read reports of this conversation has access to that mandate letter just as parliamentarians do, to which I will be held accountable. My instructions are to ensure our resource sectors remain a source of jobs, prosperity, and opportunity in a world that values sustainable practices. That goes to the heart of my focus over these past 15 weeks. We can no longer have conversations about resource development or economic growth without talking about environmental sustainability. We can no longer talk about moving our natural resources to markets without first ensuring we have a regulatory process that carries the confidence of Canadians. So it's time for us to have an open discussion about our environmental assessment system, one driven by climate change imperatives, supported by world-renowned science and technology, and reflected of diversity of Canadians. And it starts by seeking consensus. We'll never get everybody saying the same thing. Just witness the questions that have been posed to me in the House over the last number of weeks. I think if we could get agreement on the other side about the questions they're going to ask the government, we'd be in great shape, but I'm not holding my breath. But we can develop a process for reviewing and assessing major resource projects that will be acceptable to Canadians. In the interim, we've developed a transitional approach for major resource projects under review. We are not asking the proponents of these existing proposals to go back to square one. Instead, we are insisting upon more meaningful consultations with Indigenous peoples and affected communities. We want to listen intently and engage respectfully before decisions on these projects are made, because nothing less will do. We are also requiring for the first time that major federal reviews include an environmental assessment of a project's upstream greenhouse gas emissions. This will help to inform our national climate change plan with the provinces and with the territories. And we are ensuring that decisions on any resource project are based on science and evidence, and that the evidence includes traditional Indigenous knowledge. That's why we will be modernizing the National Energy Board so that its composition reflects regional views and has deep expertise in Indigenous traditional knowledge. This type of engagement is a recurring theme in my mandate letter. For example, the Prime Minister has also asked me to work closely with the provinces and territories on the Canadian energy strategy. The goal is to protect Canada's energy security while also encouraging energy conservation and bringing cleaner renewable energy onto a smarter electricity grid. We have similar ambitions when it comes to the continued greening of our mining and forest industries. The Canadian brand in mining is recognized around the world as a leader in sustainable development and innovation. And the same holds true for all of the Canadian forestry companies who have been improving mill efficiencies, finding new uses for conventional forest products, and investing in innovative new products and technologies. We want to build on these successes. That's why one of the first things our government did was to make sure Canada is part of Mission Innovation, an ambitious new global partnership that is bringing 20 countries together with some of the world's best-known entrepreneurs to accelerate the clean energy revolution. And I'm very pleased that the member from Portage Lisgar was able to join me in our hometown of Winnipeg to welcome the American and Mexican Secretaries of Energy to that historic meeting. So how will we do that? By doubling government investment in transformative clean energy research and development over the next 5 years, by increasing collaboration among participating countries, and by spurring private sector investments in clean technology. The Prime Minister has already made commitments to invest an additional $100 million each year in clean technology producers and $200 million more annually to support innovation and the use of clean technologies in the natural resource sectors. Canada has the resources, the expertise and the experience to lead the fight against climate change while positioning itself as a global leader in low-carbon energy and sustainable resource development. We also have an opportunity to do all of this as part of a continental approach with our North American partners. That's especially true in the energy sector. Earlier this month, I hosted the American and Mexican Secretaries of Energy in Winnipeg, where we signed a Memorandum of Understanding on climate change and energy collaboration. It reflects a bold vision for our continent, a vision that secures North America's place as one of the world's most dynamic energy regions, a vision that strengthens our collective energy security, and a vision that commits us to collaboration on environmental stewardship. It's a vision within our grasp, a vision with potential for other resource sectors, and a vision that can reset the course of our economy to create opportunities for generations to come. Cette vision est bel et bien et notre...
It's a vision within our grasp. It's a vision with potential for other resource sectors. And it's a vision that can reset the course of our economy to create opportunities for generations to come.
Show respect for the land and water and acknowledge the essential role of Indigenous peoples. We can be an example, not just to the world, but to ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Again, we're very grateful for your comments. So now we're going to open the floor to some questions, and the first person up, Mr. Saria.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Honourable Minister Carr, for coming today to speak to us about your letter of mandate from our Prime Minister, and for telling us about how important the natural resources sector is. As you know, my riding is Nickel Belt. That's a name that's quite reflective of a beautiful resource, and nickel. But it's good to see that our government is taking an approach to natural resources that relies on cooperation with the private sector, cooperation with Indigenous peoples, and cooperation with municipalities and the three other ministers who are involved. Now, speaking of the support for innovation and clean energy, well, it's very refreshing to see what will be happening, because if you look at forestry, mines, agriculture and fisheries, it's very refreshing to see what your approach will be. So I'm looking forward to working with the Natural Resources Minister and Parliament. Today, I'd like to talk about the mining sector.
And it's a kind of a best-kept secret in the mining industry and the industry across Canada. Last Friday, I had the opportunity on an official launch of LMIT, Laurentian Mining Innovation and Technology, which Laurentian University is a world-class leader in R&D and mining research when you look at the application of innovation and research in the mining company. And it's the only university across Canada that actually has exploration and mining all around it. So they're in a very good position to prosper that. Part of the LMIT that was launched, which is the Laurentian Mining Innovation and Technology, we have a part of that group is occupational health and safety. We also have the MERC, which is the Mining Exploration and Research Center. We have Morocco that looks at the mining innovation, and we also have Living with Lakes Center that our Prime Minister visited. In addition to the Northern Ontario, we also have NORCAT. And NORCAT partners with the private sector and the mining industry to look at bringing some of the products to market. And also we have CEMI, the Center for Excellence in Mining. The other element that we looked at, which creates, which is responsible for 23,000 mining and supply jobs across Northern Ontario, is SAMHSA. It's a mining and supply that looks at exporting our products across the world. In addition, as you've heard, the Nitronu Snow Lab, which recently won the Nobel Prize for Physics. So there's a lot of amazing R&D projects that are happening in the mining industry. Laurentian University has just applied for a funding with the Canada First Excellence Fund that looks at, and this fund typically looks at aerospace, technology, the health sector. This $65 million R&D is the only application in the mining industry. Laurentian University has made their short list and is partnering with another fine institution, the University of British Columbia. I know, Minister, you mentioned earlier about the importance of the mining industry to Canada and then the innovation part of it. I'll just give you a few little facts here on the mining industry for the committee. There's approximately 380,000 people across Canada. The mining industry is the largest sector of employer of Aboriginal peoples in Canada on a proportional basis. Employment is poised to increase. Canada has the largest mining and supply sector globally, with more than 3,400 companies supplying engineering, geotech, environmental, financial, and other supply and mining operations. These that work in the mining is the highest paid salaries of any industrial sector in Canada, with an average annual pay exceeding $110,000. Canada has an economic agenda in the mining industry for contributing $54 billion to the GDP to the country. Also, as an export, we're exporting 19.6% of our Canadian goods across the world. So when we look at the mining of mineral production, we're talking about $43 billion of the Canadian economy. Always and extend the invitation to visit Northern Ontario and the mining industry to look at the innovation and research. So my question, Mr. Minister, is many companies have spent millions of dollars for exploration of mining projects in Canada. How can the National Energy Board, in cooperation with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, help to facilitate and support the mining industries, the companies, to simplify the startup of new mines, for quicker processing times, for permits, certificates of environmental assessments, which have been lagged behind during the past decade? Also, the second question is, how can the National Resource and Energy Board and the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change support the increase and the improvement of the regulatory conditions of increase for exporting across the world? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Minister, we've got about 2 minutes to answer that question.
Well, I think I should let him answer it. That was terrific. couple of things to say. The first is that I'm really looking forward to Sunday and Monday in Toronto at the Prospector Developers Association of Canada meeting, which is one of the most important mines meetings in the world, with thousands of people who come to Canada. And they come to Canada for a good reason, because we're leaders. You talk about regulation. Everybody wants to make sure that regulations are streamlined, they're efficient, and they don't unnecessarily get in the way of any proponent. But we've had a problem with public confidence in the regulatory system in Canada, and we're out to change that. We're out to improve it. Maybe during the course of the next little while, we can talk about the 5 principles that Minister McKenna and I tabled a few weeks ago that will determine the short-term approach. But in the long term, we want to modernize the National Energy Board, because we understand that in the long term we have to have a regulatory process that does carry the confidence of Canadians. And I will be looking to members of this committee for their good advice as that modernization, that review of the National Energy Board begins to pick up steam in the short and medium term. And we'll be certainly looking for people so knowledgeable as you are on the mining sector about ways in which we can ensure that that modernization, that reform facilitates confidence in the process and therefore speeds the way to sustainable projects.
Your timing is impeccable. Thank you. I now turn the floor over to Ms. Bergen, I understand.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Minister, for being here. It's a pleasure to be able to take a little more time than the 30-second exchanges that we've had. I want to start with one topic and then go on to the 5 principles that you just mentioned. When Parliament first started, early January, December, you repeated a number of times that no pipelines had been built between 2006 till 2015. This past week, you've changed that. I think in Calgary, at the Calgary Chamber lunch, you changed that. Obviously, you were informed that there had been not only 4 major pipelines built, but they actually had received approval through the National Energy Board. You now have been saying that there's been no pipelines built since 2011. Is it your belief, or is your information that there has been no approvals at the National Energy Board for federal pipelines since 2011?
No, it's our assertion and our belief that no major pipelines taking natural resources to Tidewater were built during your majority government between 2011 and October 19th. Is that correct?
Well, it would depend, I guess, how you look at how the system of pipelines work. I think even there's been a number of pipelines that Enbridge has built. A couple actually that go right through down to one that goes through Manitoba, that does eventually through the refinery system down at the Gulf Coast get to Tidewater. However, and I guess I would just say I understand politically the point that you are trying to make. And certainly we have big shoulders, we can bear it and we can defend it and argue it. But I do think for the hundreds, thousands of people who have worked and worked very hard to build those pipelines, invested millions, if in some cases billions of dollars to build 1.2 million barrels per day of additional pipeline capacity, I think we should as politicians acknowledge that. And I think you've made your political point, and I do understand it, but I would suggest going forward that we acknowledge and congratulate those companies and those workers who have built hundreds of thousands of kilometers of pipeline, as well as increased Canadian capacity. So I'm glad to hear that you do recognize that there has been approvals through the National Energy Board. And I would say the NEB does work. And I think that there has been a narrative created over the last couple of months that would hold up what you were trying to do. But I would disagree with that narrative. I think the National Energy Board does work. There's always room for improvement, but I think that we should not undermine it and undermine the pipelines that were built under that process. So I do want to go, though, to the 5 principles that you had talked about. And I know that your goal was to create more certainty and clarity in the transition process for pipelines that were under approval and other projects. Are you aware that what you've announced has actually created more uncertainty and there's more confusion? Proponents aren't entirely sure now that the decision, it will be a political decision. So what will the criteria be in terms of measuring upstream GHGs? What will the Cabinet be looking at in terms of actual real numbers Where's the goalpost that you want proponents to go through? Will you be weighing, of these 5 principles, which principle will have more weight? So will it be the views of Indigenous people? Will it be community engagement? Will it be GHG emissions? There are 5 principles. Are they listed in order of weight? And what are the exact numbers? Because we haven't seen numbers. It's very hard to get information. Proponents are probably more confused than ever. So I think they're looking for some clarity today.
Well, the 5 principles you have articulated, well, some of them you have, some of them you haven't. No project proponent will be asked to return to the starting line. And that's important because there is a sense of fairness for proponents that have been involved in this for a very long time and who have invested considerable capital in moving these projects forward. So there is not a weighting of 20% or 21% for one and 19% for another. Ultimately, the government will take the recommendations of the National Energy Board, will add process of its own to more meaningfully consult communities. In the case of Kinder Morgan, we've added 4 months of the government's timeline in reviewing the National Energy Board process. We're expecting a recommendation sometime in May of 2016, and there will be a decision that the government will take in December of 2016. There's a separate process for the Energy East timeline. Actually, the clock hasn't started ticking yet on Energy East, but once it does, we've already announced the rules that will govern that process, and we will add time for the Government of Canada to do its own consulting, particularly within Indigenous communities. So ultimately, and there's been some controversy about whether or not the decision is a political decision. Well, my honourable friends know as well as I do that when the government makes a decision, it is by definition a political decision for which it is held accountable. We don't back away from that. That's not the same as politicizing a debate, trying to set regions one against another, trying to set interests, sectors, peoples. What we're interested in doing is introducing a credible regulatory process that will lead to a result that carries the confidence of Canadians. And ultimately, as you know, we will be held accountable for that decision.
How much time do I have, Chair?
Time for one quick question. You've got a minute.
Can you understand, and I understand what you're saying about Cabinet making a political decision, but can you recognize, because these 5 principles are very broad and ambiguous, even as far as the GHG upstream emissions and the control that these proponents have, and they don't know what the Cabinet will be looking at. So you have now changed it and taken it out of the NEB's hands, where prior to that, the NEB made a recommendation. Under our government, they made a recommendation, for example, in Northern Gateway. We said we approved it based on those recommendations. But if you would even tell proponents that you will accept the NEB recommendations, that will give them some certainty. Can you understand the uncertainty that is being caused because of the ambiguity and the political nature of the decision?
Well, we just agreed that the decision is by its very nature political and actually comes as a result of the legislative changes that were passed in an omnibus bill by Parliament in 2012. So we can agree that by nature it's a political decision. And on the matter of some certainty, well, the time frame is certain. The Prime Minister has been clear, and we've said in the House many, many times that it is our objective to move our natural resources to market sustainably. That is the goal. And it's not going to happen unless we follow a regulatory process that cuts the mustard. And that involves all of the elements within these 5 principles. So that's what we've announced, that's what we'll do, and we'll do it within the time frame that we have articulated.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Cannings, over to you.
Well, again, thanks, Minister Carr, for coming here today. We really appreciate it. My NDP colleagues and I noted with some concern that your mandate letter makes no mention of the Ring of Fire. It was also missing from the throne speech and the Liberal platform. This is a tremendous opportunity for Northern Ontario that would boost our economy as a whole and create thousands of jobs. Why is it not on your government's radar, and would you provide the $1 billion investment that's needed to unlock this project?
What is on the government's radar is a whole new approach to federal-provincial relations in Canada. You know that the Prime Minister will meet the premiers in Vancouver next week for the second time since elected Prime Minister. It was January of 2009, the last time the Prime Minister of Canada called the premiers to a meeting. So 7 years, 6 and change passed between these meetings. How do you have important national conversations when the provincial leaders and the federal Prime Minister are not at the same table? So I have had the pleasure of speaking either face-to-face or on the phone with every one of Canada's ministers of energy to talk about the federal role in stimulating a discussion of the Canadian energy strategy that has been so well built so far by the Council of the Federation and the premiers. I am very keen to have conversations with the Government of Ontario on the Ring of Fire project. We know the enormous potential that it carries. We know where it is at this moment. This moment doesn't mean that this is where we're going to be in 6 months or a year. So I've reached out to my colleagues. Also, many of you will know that, and the member for Portage and Lisgar certainly will know, that Winnipeg is hosting the annual meeting of Energy and Mines Ministers in August of this summer. And that will be, if not the first time, then a terrific opportunity for a face-to-face meeting between provincial energy ministers and the Federal Minister of Natural Resources. I am keen to have a conversation with Northern Ontario about mineral potential there and in other places. We're keen to work with them collaboratively to ensure that governments are talking to each other, something which sadly has not been in the case for too long in Canada.
Thank you. There's also just a passing reference to forestry. When this is a sector that contributes billions of dollars to our economy and employs thousands of Canadians. So what measures will you put in place to support forestry? And when do you plan to have a new softwood lumber deal with the United States, and what might that look like at this moment?
As you know, Minister Freeland has been talking to industry, talking to the provinces, consulting widely on the softwood lumber negotiation. You know that the current agreement expired in October of 2015, and we're now in the midst of a one-year standstill period. There have been no negotiations yet, but the Minister of International Trade is keenly aware of the importance of this international negotiation, and she is immersed in the file, having serious conversations right across the country. You know, the interests are not identical, as you know, from one province to the next. But I know that Minister Freeland is committed to consulting widely and negotiating aggressively, and we would hope successfully on Canada's behalf. We also know that this is often an area of bilateral negotiation that can involve national leaders talking to each other. We know that there will be opportunities for that. But you should be comforted to know that Minister Freeland is, to use her words, seized of the issue, and she realizes its importance for Canada.
In question period today, you were asked a couple of questions about the Site C Dam in British Columbia and the consultation process around that. And in your answers, and one answer was included, without that consultation, no energy projects will be approved. We do not repeat failed ways, we look for better ones. And your second answer, you said, this government has done whatever it can to send the signals to Indigenous communities across the country that this will be a new era of meaningful nation-to-nation consultations with Indigenous peoples. And yet there was a delegation of Indigenous peoples here last week who have been active on the Site C file. They've been part of a camp there, and they couldn't get a meeting with any member of the government on this. And so what kind of signal is that sending?
I just know how much of my time has been spent with Indigenous leaders across the country. on resource development issues. We've had 3 roundtables, one in Winnipeg, one in Halifax, one in Vancouver. There will be continuing conversations. It's not been possible for me to meet with all of those who request it, but over time we'll meet with more and more. And I think the principle is sound. And it's not only the principle, it's the reality of the relationship that Indigenous people have with the land and the water. And this is a learning experience for all of us who travel across the country and who hear stories from Indigenous leaders and community members about the nature of that relationship and the thousands of years that that relationship has been passed on culturally through generations, and how important it means to this current generation not only to learn from the elders and what has been bequeathed to them, but also their responsibility to future generations in how they leave the planet. Every once in a while I quote this, and I hope I'm not wrong, but the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau said something like, "The fruits of the earth are for everyone, the earth itself for no one." Without getting into a legal question about property rights, I appreciate the sympathy and the sentiment that the way in which we respect the land, the water, and the wildlife in our own time is one of the measures how we will be assessed by future generations. So I'm sorry I can't meet with everybody all the time, but I think I understand the sensitivities and the sensibilities.
Thank you. Mr. Harvey, you're up.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for coming here today, and I'm a new member, so of course I'm nervous. So I've written some things down, and I'll kind of hop back and forth. But firstly, before I get started, I'd like to say that I live in a riding in New Brunswick, Tobique-Mactaquac, which some people in this room are well aware is a very rural riding, relies heavily on natural resources, manufacturing, and agriculture. And during the campaign, you know, I met with a lot of people and we talked about a lot of things, and a lot of it was centered around agricultural development, innovations in technology, not just pertaining to agriculture, but also manufacturing and natural resource development, and the path forward, not just within natural resource development, but in all sectors. And before I ask my question, I just wanted to highlight a couple paragraphs that caught my eye as you were speaking. And one is, a future built on innovation and adapting to changing times by finding greener ways to extract and develop our natural resources and get them to market. And I really liked that paragraph. I highlighted it. For me, that's representative of what I feel we're trying to represent as a party. The other paragraph that really caught my eye was, we can no longer have conversations about resource development or economic growth without talking about environmental sustainability. And I recognize that natural resource development is an important part of the Canadian economy, but at the same time, as I'm out doing door-to-door and meeting with stakeholders, I recognize not only an opportunity, but a commitment level from the people in my area that they would like to see these industries developed using environmentally sustainable approaches. So my question is, in regards to your meeting with the other ministers a few weeks ago, you met with American and Mexican colleagues in Winnipeg to sign the Memorandum of Understanding on the North American Clean Energy Collaboration. Can you please elaborate with the committee the areas of the collaboration that were agreed to by our government with our North American partners related to Canada's investment in clean energy, energy efficiency, and clean technology?
First of all, let me start by acknowledging the very good work that was done by the previous government on this file. We did not start the trilateral conversations. There was a memorandum of understanding that was signed in December of 2014 that actually led to some very good energy mapping continent-wide that we unveiled in Winnipeg. And that work was started by the previous government. We give them credit for that. We built on that good, solid platform in meaningful ways. So we have established 6 working groups, all of which will be led by Canada, the United States, or Mexico. And you've mentioned some of them. Key areas such as low carbon electricity, clean energy technologies, Energy efficiency, we have lots to learn from our partners continentally on energy efficiency. Carbon capture, you know that there are some very high-profile projects, particularly in Saskatchewan. Carbon capture and storage is very expensive at the moment, but we also know, and everyone who owns a device understands, that what you pay for it in year 1 is not always what you pay for it in year 5 or year 8. That these technologies have front-end costs, but over time they become far more reasonably priced. And we believe that will be true in some of the cutting-edge technologies, including carbon capture, use and storage. Climate change adaptation. I come from a flood-prone province. We understand too well what this means. And just to hearken back, my personal mentor in politics was a progressive conservative. His name was Duff Roblin. You may recall the name because he built what was known as Duff's Ditch. Duff's Ditch was a $64 million project that was agreed to by John George Diefenbaker when he was Prime Minister, and Duff Roblin, two good Tories, well, one more progressive than the other. And it has saved, in the 50 years that it has been taking all of that excess water from the Red River and channeling it around the city, billions of dollars and countless moments of misery among families. This was a visionary decision about flood mitigation. You know, there will be other opportunities for this government and succeeding governments to have the courage to make a decision that might be unpopular at the moment, but makes sense for generations to come. So adaptation is part of it, reducing emissions from the oil and gas sector, including from methane. And the 3 countries will work together to increase alignment and ensure that the North American energy sector is developing responsibly, effectively, and efficiently. We all know that the American administration is working towards a political deadline, that the political season is well underway, if any of us haven't noticed. And it's going to get more and more intriguing, no doubt. So there is a sense, at least from our government's perspective, that now is a very good time to aggressively look at ways of deepening the continental relationship. And that's what we're doing. We're doing it through official groups, and we're doing it with frequent ministerial meetings. In fact, I'll be up very early tomorrow morning, catching a plane to Houston for the CIRA International Conference on Energy, one of the most important energy conferences in the world. And I will be either on panels or meeting with the Secretaries of Energy from the United States and Mexico, again, only a few weeks later, Australia, Israel, and other countries. So we will take the very good start, we think, that we have established trilaterally in North America, and also widen the conversation, particularly around mission innovation, which I described in my remarks. So lots more to do, very good start. I was just thrilled, as I'm sure the member from Portage Lisgar was, to host this meeting in Manitoba. And it won't be the last meeting that we host in Manitoba.
Thank you. We've got just a few seconds left in your time, but we might have gone over a bit in some earlier ones, so I may come back to you. Okay. Ms. Stubbs, it's now your turn. Now we're in the 5-minute round now, so people are going to have to be a little bit more efficient with the use of their words.
Okay, I'll speak fast. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today on such short notice. I really appreciate it. Before I turn to questions related to your mandate letter, I did just want to commend you on your recognition that Canadian mining is recognized as a world leader in sustainable development and innovation, but I wanted to point out for the record that so is Canada's oil and gas industry. And of course, for decades, both our technology and innovation, as well as our regulatory best practices, particularly in Alberta, have been exported and adopted for decades in other oil producing regions around the world. And those technologies have served to enhance energy development while minimizing the environmental footprint and creating jobs and increasing government revenue. And the biggest investors and developers of alternative and renewable energies are, of course, conventional oil and gas developers. So those efforts aren't mutually exclusive. But as you mentioned earlier, your mandate letter from the Prime Minister did state that your overarching goal will be to, and I quote, ensure that our resource sector remains a source of jobs, prosperity, and opportunity. As you know, the oil industry lost 100,000 jobs by the end of 2015, and just last month alone, Alberta lost 22,000 full-time jobs. So people in my rural Alberta and responsibly developed resource-based riding are hurting. You know, they're losing their jobs, they're losing their homes. It's a crisis in Alberta and a crisis in Lakeland, and times are becoming desperate for many. And mine is a riding and mine is a province that, of course, contributes so much to all of Canada, in large part because of the energy development there. So we know and we all acknowledge that Canada's investment climate is influenced by multiple factors, and we recognize that the downturn in the energy sector is being driven primarily by low global oil prices and global economic crises. But a major impact, of course, is government policy and how that either exacerbates or mitigates those external factors. So you, in your opening comments, you called it a transitional approach, which of course is by nature uncertain and unstable. And the changes that you've announced to the regulatory approval process, they're either not fleshed out in detail, or the ones we know for sure are causing confusion and also will add costs and delay and time. So, like all sectors, of course, Canada's energy industry requires certainty and predictability and stability from government. So, your recently announced interim measures and your indications that more may be coming only increase ambiguity, uncertainty, instability, and ultimately they cost lost jobs. So, I just wonder, how soon can Canadians expect the government to clarify its regulatory requirements in order to ensure that our resource sector remains, as noted in your mandate letter, a source of jobs, prosperity, and opportunity?
First, acknowledge the innovation within Alberta. People forget that it was actually innovation that led to the development of the oil sands in the first place. And no one on the other side of the House, in questions to me, or as far as I know to anybody else, has brought up the work of CASIA, which is this group of leaders within the oil and gas sector in Alberta who have joined together. The acronym is for Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, putting aside competitive pressures. These are people who are in the same business, competing for the same markets, who are working together with considerable R&D investment in order to assist in the transition that everybody knows is a reality internationally and within Canada itself. So I have a lot of faith in the entrepreneurship of Albertans and of Canadians. And they've demonstrated it before, and they continue to demonstrate it now. And we will be making important investments in green technology. It's a campaign platform commitment. We will be working with industry, sector by sector, and we'll certainly be working with these entrepreneurs and innovators in Alberta. And oh, by the way, people shouldn't forget that the NDP Premier of Alberta, when she announced her climate change plan, was flanked by 4 leaders within the oil and gas sector in Alberta, to the surprise of some, and an Indigenous leader. So with that kind of sectoral, Indigenous, and political movement at the same time and in a similar direction, you would think that much other good could come of it. So the clarity in the principles is what we will do in the interim process. And I am convinced that the capacity of the sector to adapt to international and domestic changes in policy and in commodity prices will position us very well internationally to take advantage of those changes as they develop.
Thank you very much, Minister. 5 minutes goes awfully fast. Mr. Tan, over to you for 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming to our meeting. I'm a new member. I guess some of the members, just like me, are the new members to the committee. So we are very keen to know more details about the government's policy and positions. I can see my colleagues, they know their local issues very well. I had my master and PhD from U of T in Pulp and Paper Center. and worked in the pulp and paper area shortly, and then worked in our nuclear industry for 10 years. So I may have some question to ask you in the future. Okay, as I just mentioned, also mentioned by the honorable member, that the government of Canada has introduced the 5 interim principles to guide its decision-making on the major natural resources project until there's an environmental process in place. So my question is very quick, and how is the government of Canada restoring the public trust in the way Canada reviews and assesses major natural resource projects?
By having important conversation with communities who are affected by projects, by understanding the impact of these projects on Indigenous practices and Indigenous ways. It's been remarkable as I travel across the country talking to people in the sector and people within Indigenous communities and in other communities that no one has really reached out to them before. And this is not always part of a regulator's mandate to reach out. But if we don't reach out between regulators and governments to have these kinds of conversations that matter to people, it's very unlikely that we're going to have a successful result. A much better way. And personally, Mr. Chair, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic mostly because of the kind of response and energy that I have seen in these roundtables where Indigenous leaders, environmentalists, and business leaders are sitting around the same table at the same time talking about the same thing, and in large measure are ending up at the same place. So it is our job to create a set of conditions where that can happen, which I think is the best way to, let me say it again, the result that probably everybody would share. And that is that we find ways of moving our natural resources sustainably. So the principles will underpin that. Public confidence will be earned by the living out of these principles, by the regulator, by community leaders, and by government. And it's our hope that at the end of the process, we'll end up at a better place than we have coming from.
I'm fine.
Okay. Minister, I've just got my eye on the clock here. I understand you have to be out of here by 4:30, fairly sharp. Is that correct? Okay. So, Mr. Barlow, you might not get all of your 5 minutes, but you'll get close to it. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll speak fast. Thank you again, Minister, for coming on and so quickly into our meetings. I really do appreciate that. But I wanted to clarify a couple of things. You just said that there's been no consultation between the NEB and First Nations. On Northern Gateway alone, there was close to 1,000 meetings. With Energy East, there's been close to 500 consultation meetings. So I just want to clarify that. That's a little disingenuous to say that there's been no consultation on that. And then you talked about the NDP government in Alberta. I think if you talk to the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers and their members on what they feel about that carbon tax in Alberta, it would be a very different answer than what you may think you're getting. But you talked about what I was really happy to hear about, that you talked about the courage of a government to make what may seem like an unpopular decision at the time. And we've been talking a lot about Alberta, Saskatchewan, but I think we also have to talk about Atlantic Canada, the impact that the energy downturn has had across Canada. And I understand, I don't profess to say that a government can control oil prices, but it can control or mitigate the atmosphere that goes around with that. And that includes the confidence for the private sector to invest in that sector. And what really concerned me with the Prime Minister and yourself, when you've been asked the question, if, for example, Energy East or the Trans Mountain Pipeline passes through the National Energy Board guidelines and review, you won't commit to it. Now, you talked about the courage to make a decision. You will never get consensus on these types of projects, whether it's a wastewater treatment plant or a pipeline. Why will you not commit to be supporting Energy East, Trans Mountain Pipeline, those kinds of projects, if it passes the National Energy Board criteria?
profess to have more than the average dollop of courage, but I can tell you when these decisions are made, not everybody's going to love them. When I look across the chamber and hear the questions that are posed to us about these projects, never mind about a pan-Canadian framework for climate change, never mind about reforming the regulator, but just about these projects, they are generating a lot of emotion, and they're generating a lot of division. And politicians from all stripes and from all levels of government are weighing in to express their passionately held views. Well, if they have the right opportunities to express those passionately held views, then ultimately you're going to have to hold us accountable for how we assess all of that. Because there will be decisions
I have
made.
almost no time. I appreciate that
Let him
as your
start.
answer.
He's still answering the question, in fairness. I think you should let him
Yeah,
finish.
I know, and I get that, but I appreciate.
Go ahead. No, I see
appreciate
to you.
that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you kind of answered it, and that's great. Just lastly, and again in your mandate letter, you talked about the importance of having that partnership with Mexico and the United States, which I think is fantastic. Appreciate you getting work on that. My concern is, has there been discussion of the fact that the United States has lifted its export bans? It is not talking about a national tax on carbon. Where we are, the producers that we've spoken with, this puts us at a very significant competitive disadvantage. Is that going to be a topic for your discussions on a carbon? If we are going to talk about a tax on carbon, is this going to be something that's done with the Continental Partnership?
We understand the importance of the competitive environment. We understand that Canada is an international player and an important one in the energy sector, and that we have to be mindful of our national competitive position, not just only in energy, but all over the place. Yeah. For 16 years, I was president of the Business Council of Manitoba. Every day, we talked about Manitoba's competitiveness. Every day, I learned from our province's leading entrepreneurs and risk takers and the importance of certainty in the business climate. Competitiveness was driving almost everything that we recommended to governments, federal and provincial. And I believe, as a member of Parliament, now as Minister of Natural Resources, that Canada's competitive position in an ever-changing international market is absolutely vital. I recognize that, and I recognize its importance.
Minister, thank you very much. That's. I want to say again how much we appreciate you taking the time to be here today as a new committee with a new mandate and with a lot of brand new members. This was a meaningful discussion, and we're very grateful for your time. Mr. Hamilton, thank you for coming out today and sitting here very patiently. So we look forward to you coming back on future dates, and you're always welcome, Minister. Anytime you can attend, and we know we'll see you in March, and we'll firm up the date specifically. So thank you again.
If I could have just 10 seconds. I also I'm really so pleased at the respectful tone that I have developed with the critics. I think that Canadians appreciate it, and I think we have a responsibility to ensure it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So we're going to suspend the meeting just for a couple of minutes to change over to the next session.
Thank you.